Over the years, I've made several videos which have touched upon top Nazi leaders' attempts to make peace with Britain and the United States during World War II. One of the most serious of these surprising attempts was outlined by me that concerned Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler's peace offers to Britain. Not at the war's end, as most of the Himmler biographers have concentrated on, but his little-known but potentially more impactful offers from 1943 onwards, all eventually killed off by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. However, Himmler was a dangerous and Machiavellian character, who soon after the failure of his 1943 peace proposals moved to do two things. Firstly, I have shown in other videos that Himmler was involved on some level with the anti-Hitler plotters that tried to kill the Führer in July 1944. He was also the driving force behind trying to save as much German wealth as possible, realizing that by 1944 the war was effectively lost. Which brings me to the subject of this program, the so-called Red House meetings and the conspiracies that emanated from them. Himmler's SS state was, by 1944, absolutely enormous, hugely wealthy and, very important, semi-autonomous. Himmler was not only absolute leader of the SS, which would grow to over 900,000 personnel. His economics office controlled the complicated system of concentration camps, ghettos, and forced labor enterprises, generating enormous sums for the SS coffers. Himmler also controlled all police organizations in Germany and had an excellent foreign intelligence unit, the SD, ensuring that he knew better than any of the other top leaders exactly what was going on both within and outside of the Third Reich. Himmler made sure that most of Germany's industrialists were made honorary SS officers or were influenced to donate to SS funds. After all, it made business sense to be a friend of Himmler and his SS empire. Good things happened, profitable things. Himmler had also overseen the appointment of SS economics officers onto the management boards of most of the major economic concerns of the Reich, Himmler's spies. This influence and power over German industry came to a head in an extraordinary meeting held at the Maison Rouge Hotel in German-occupied Strasbourg, France, on the 10th of August 1944, while far to the northwest the Battle of Normandy raged on. The Maison Rouge, or Red House, was an old hotel in the centre of the city, not far from Germany. The Allies were made aware of the meeting quite soon afterwards, and were horrified by what they read. The reports on this are now available both at the British National Archives in London and the US National Archives in Washington, D.C. The subtitle of the US version of the report explains Himmler's plan quite succinctly. Quote, "Plans of German industrialists to engage in underground activity after Germany's defeat. Flow of capital to neutral countries." End quote. So who was at the meeting? Himmler did not attend in person. After all, admitting that defeat was inevitable was a treasonous act. He was represented by an Obergruppenführer Scheid, who chaired the meeting. Scheid was also a director of many German industrial concerns. All the megalithic German firms sent representatives to the Maison Rouge meeting, for example, the armaments firm Krupp, Röchling, Messerschmitt, Volkswagen, Rheinmetall. Also at the table were engineers representing a firm called Braun Bovary, Herkuleswerke and Stadtwerke. Civil servants were also in attendance from the German Naval Ministry in Paris and the Armaments Ministry, also from Paris. These attendees indicated official sanction of the meeting by influential military leaders. A second meeting was held some months later to confirm agreements made at the Maison Rouge. Everything said and agreed upon was treason. Obergruppenführer Scheid had opened the meeting by stating that the battle for France was lost, along with the war. It was made clear to the civilians present that this was the official view of Scheid's boss, that is, Heinrich Himmler. As the report quotes, "From now on, government will allocate large sums to industrialists so that each can establish a secure post-war foundation in other countries." End quote. Himmler now lifted the prohibition against the export of capital. The new order was to export as much of that is, the industrialist capital as possible. The Maison Rouge meeting and its follow-up were Himmler setting the stage for the economic survival of German industrial wealth and SS wealth following defeat, that would be under a cabal of Himmler's chosen men and or allies, safe from the reaches of the Allied powers. So Himmler was ordering Germany's resources sent out of Germany to foreign countries, where they could be used to form the industrial and financial basis for the resurrection of the so-called Fourth Reich, all under Himmler's control, of course, meaning that Himmler planned to survive the defeat. Further, he ordered that, quote, "existing financial reserves in foreign nations must be placed at the disposal of the party, so that a strong German empire can be created after the defeat." End quote. The party would help with transfers. A network of trusted SS officers would be in charge of the companies. Himmler's SS was extremely well placed to administer such a venture. Himmler had already formed 2 research institutes to study the problems. Gruppe 6V studied world economics from a large building in Hamburg, and a second branch in Kiel focused on world markets and trade. All the economists were hand-picked SS officers. The Central SS Economic Evaluation Department monitored this work and worked closely with 3 German ministries: economics, armaments, and economic warfare. In this way, the SS learned the best methods to cloak German assets abroad. Every major German company had, by 1943, been evaluated by the SS institutes, and SS officers had been placed on their boards. For example, Himmler's interest at the giant chemicals firm of Kali was handled by Dr. Werner Naumann, a minister in the Nazi government. That at IG Farben by Baron Georg von Schnitzler, including Siemens, Zucker, Unilever, and so on. Krupp was the only major firm to avoid having SS officers on its board. When the Allies realized the significance of the Maison Rouge meetings, they were deeply concerned. Germany was heading towards defeat, yet here was Himmler taking measures to ensure the financial survival of Nazism under his authority. As Reich Armaments Minister Albert Speer said, quote, "I pity anyone attempting to unravel any enterprise set up by Himmler. The layers of deceit and the breathtaking imagination that this unlikely man was capable of were unreal." End quote. British intelligence organisation MI6 received a disturbing report in October 1944, just before they received the Red House report from the Americans, to the effect that the French intelligence agency had information that Obergruppenführer Hans Adolf Putzmann, a known war criminal, had been appointed by Himmler as Commander-in-Chief of post-war Nazi resistance. 500,000 so-called resistors were given identity papers of people who had been killed in Allied air raids. MI6 passed the information to SOE, the Special Operations Executive, and once the Red House report was known, SOE considered assassinating Himmler, as he was considered to be so dangerous. US intelligence reported that the Japanese now considered Himmler to be the man in charge of Germany, not the ailing Hitler. So, not only was Himmler in the process of asset-stripping Germany and offshoring this vast wealth for a putative post-war Fourth Reich, but he was also organizing post-war resistance within Germany itself, what later became known as the Werwolf organization, opening the vista of a partisan warfare against the Allied occupation well after 1945. Himmler had also acquired huge wealth through various backdoor methods. In order to help industrialists have contact with Hitler and other members of the party, Himmler had created the Circle of Friends of the Reichsfuhrer, its members making generous donations to the SS in order to secure favorable contracts and contacts. Companies that joined the circle of friends included Flick Steel, Siemens, IG Farben, Dresdner Bank, and Deutsche Bank. In September 1943, Himmler's private account received a donation of 1 million Reichsmarks from these grateful donors. Dresdner Bank in particular became known as the SS Bank, hosting several accounts in the names of Himmler and other top SS officers. All of this further concerned the Allies. Himmler's order to transfer wealth abroad was largely successful, particularly in Latin America, where German firms like IG Farben, Ferrostahl, and AEG suddenly expanded hugely. The US government put pressure on Latin American governments to try and stop the SS. In Uruguay, for example, the US State Department forced the government there to seize the offices of Deutsche Bank, the Banco Alemán, and seize papers passed on to the FBI, revealing the full extent of SS operations in that one country alone. In 1945, the economies of Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Paraguay were all substantially upgraded despite US scrutiny. We now know why, of course. Is it any coincidence also that so many Nazis fled to these countries post-war? German assets also went elsewhere and often closer to home, to neutral countries and even Allied nations. And these Allied nations now found themselves fighting the international networks of powerful bankers, for example the Schroeder financial house operating in New York, London and Hamburg. Kurt Schroeder, a member of the Circle of Friends of the Reichsfuhrer, had created another slush fund account for Himmler at the Stern Bank. Himmler had promoted Schroeder to SS Brigadeführer by way of thanks. Schroeder had strong business interests with Allen Dulles, who headed up US intelligence in Europe and who also sat on Schroeder's board. Schroeder and Dulles, via the German brokerage company Albert and Westrich, and Dulles's law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, created a network of companies that siphoned off SS assets. German banker Dr. Heinrich Albert represented huge US corporations like Ford, Gillette, Kodak and ITT. Just after the war, the FBI found key links between Dulles and Schroeder in New York and the diversion of IG Farben and Stahlwerke assets, but couldn't do much about it. It was also shown that they had been cloaking huge amounts of Bosch shares which had been transferred abroad. When FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover went to see President Truman about this situation, the president had been lobbied hard by Ford, General Motors, Gillette, Kodak and ITT. The latter's chairman, Sophenes Behn, was another member of the Circle of Friends of the Reichsfuhrer and, according to evidence, was busily engaged in laundering SS capital. The problem was that in Europe, Allen Dulles was also the OSS chief operating out of Switzerland, effectively running US intelligence operations in Europe, and Dulles was a powerful bloc on the Allies interfering with Himmler's plans. Dulles had, according to US intelligence, operated closely with the immensely rich Wallenberg brothers in Sweden, brokering deals with the Swedish company Bofors to also hide SS assets. Dulles was able to prevent any serious investigation of all of this, while he and his business partners enriched themselves on the back of the Red House plan. The British were also involved with the Wallenbergs and Enskilda Bank in Stockholm. Indeed, Dulles' British friend and intelligence officer, Sir Charles Hambro, a banker himself, wrote a letter to President Harry S. Truman forcibly claiming that the Wallenbergs were pro-British and had not been involved in profitable activities in Germany during the war, and Hambro himself held shares in IG Farben. The US government, at J. Edgar Hoover's urgings, demanded that the Enskilda Bank and the Wallenbergs' empire be blacklisted and that the Wallenberg brothers be prosecuted as war criminals. The British government, however, refused to blacklist the bank, but the US Treasury took action against the Wallenbergs via the Nuremberg trials. but then the US State Department stopped the case. Who in the State Department ordered the investigation dropped? None other than Allen Dulles' brother, John Foster Dulles. King George VI then stepped in and knighted Marcus Wallenberg. Interestingly, Wallenberg's brother Jakob had already received the Order of the German Eagle with Star from Hitler in 1941, but the less said about that the better. The involvement of the British royal family ensured no further action was taken by the British government in this matter. This incident did little for Anglo-American relations. It has subsequently come to light that the British royal family invested heavily in the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, a secretive bank set up after World War I to deal with reparations payments. It then became a vehicle by which large amounts of shares could be transferred without too much scrutiny, similar to an offshore fund. The BIS Board of Directors included the Governor of the Bank of England, Montague Norman, Hitler's Minister for Economic Affairs, Dr. Walter Funk, Emil Pohl, a director of the Reichsbank in Berlin and responsible for moving looted Nazi gold, including gold teeth extracted from concentration camp victims, and Hermann Schmitz, CEO of IG Farben, and Baron von Schröder, who we've already met, and leading US banker Thomas McKittrick. McKittrick described the Bank of International Settlements as, quote, a sort of club for the world's leading central bankers, a little group of like-minded men who understand and trust one another, end quote. It seems clear that they were like-minded. They liked money and didn't mind where it came from. British royal interest in the Wallenbergs and BIS seems to have led to the sudden lack of interest in investigating the shady shenanigans of the Wallenbergs and Allen Dulles, particularly as what might come out could potentially embarrass the king and his family along with many other important people. US attempts to blacklist the Bank of International Settlements were also blocked by the British Foreign Office. Both Britain and US intelligence continued with other attempts to try to counter Himmler's Red House plans, though without much success. They frequently found that they were blocked by government departments in their own countries. It was understandable considering the people they were after. Plenty of US and British bankers and others working in finance had potentially embarrassing connections that they didn't want publicly aired. Plenty of people were making a lot of money out of Himmler's diabolical plan. It also became clear that the mastermind behind many of the covert overseas ventures ordered by Himmler was SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, who would also figure prominently in Himmler's peace offer intrigues to the Western powers via neutral Sweden, both during and at the very end of World War II. However, the US Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau Jr., was not part of the plot, and he was appalled when presented with the Red House report in November 1944, and he collaborated with FBI Director Hoover to oppose the Dulles brothers and their scheming. Morgenthau believed that the carrion crows of international finance would ensure Himmler's success by their number, influence, and greed. He believed that the post-war plan to give aid to a ruined Germany, the Marshall Plan, would be superfluous, as an immense flood of German capital would return post-war. Morgenthau, though influential, couldn't get his own way, but appears to have been correct in his predictions concerning the return of German capital. In the 1950s, as the prosecutions of war criminals eased in Germany, with many of them released early, including many prominent industrialists who had used slave labor, West Germany experienced an economic miracle and within a decade at the end of the war had become the economic center of Europe. Not too bad for a nation bombed to literal ruins by 1945. The East German authorities investigated and concluded that huge sums of money had flooded back into West Germany from Latin America, Turkey, Egypt, the United States, Britain, Sweden, and Switzerland, all either locations where Himmler offshored German industrial wealth and SS wealth, or where Nazi war criminals predominated, or both. Coincidence or design? It took a long time for the information I've discussed in this program to become well known. And bear in mind, I've only discussed the very outer fringes of this subject. In order to go into this in any great detail, you would need videos of hundreds of hours. So therefore, if you want to know more information, read books. There are plenty of them around. The Red House report was only declassified in 1996 and only following a Freedom of Information Act request in the United States. The government basically did not want to release it. The first historians to access the report said they found it a surreal experience. It changed many of their opinions about World War II. It seems likely, and is acknowledged in many history books, that Himmler's plans were very successful. As MI6 officer Sir Peter Tennant remarked when in Stockholm during Himmler's peace offers and Himmler's movement of capital abroad, quote, "At the very time when we in the Secret Service were railing against the stupidity of the unconditional surrender terms on offer, there were several figures in Stockholm who would have married Himmler off to their daughter to get a piece of the action. There was a frenzy about what was on offer." End quote. All of this, I think, impinges directly on the death of Himmler in British custody on the 23rd of May 1945. It adds fuel to the fire that Himmler was murdered to silence him, to ensure that he could never reveal the full extent of his involvement with unscrupulous individuals and organizations in the Allied camp or close to Allied leaders, who profited directly from an association with Himmler and the SS state. Better for everyone that Himmler just quietly passed away, ensuring no awkward interrogations or public trial appearances, or revelations on the stand at Nuremberg that would upset the complex world of international financial intrigue and profiteering that surrounded the Reichsführer SS. Could that be the real reason for Himmler's incredibly convenient death? It's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. As I showed in my last episode of my series on the death of Heinrich Himmler, historians seem to have been puzzled for many decades as to why Himmler was heading south from the Dönitz-Rump government. It didn't make any sense. However, my own research discovered that Himmler had a secret cache of gold held in a bank for him in a region of Germany called the Harz Mountains, and that he and his men were heading south to lie low in the Harz Mountains, collect mobile wealth, and continue on their journey across the border into Switzerland and thence to Italy, to take ship to South America. Why? In order that Himmler should take his place at the head of this vast overseas financial SS empire. That this never happened was only due to chance. Himmler was only captured by chance by the British, but once they had him in their clutches, it becomes clear that he was a dead man walking. You have to remember that aside from all the financial shenanigans that I've discussed in this program, Himmler was also privy to many secrets, including peace negotiations between Nazi Germany and the Allies, particularly Great Britain. Negotiations that are in some cases still top secret today, 80 years after the end of the war. Why? To protect the reputations of now dead powerful leaders on the Allied side. Anyway, I urge you to watch my series, The Death of Himmler, for more detail on all of these theories. The available evidence, such as it is, makes for some compelling theories that mitigate against Himmler ending his life as the British government would have us believe. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share.